Hello everyone, Drip here. My buddy Key made a video talking about Dragon Ball's afterlife and his concerns with the outerversal scaling. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm just going to be responding to every point he makes concerning the afterlife's outerversal scaling and debunking anything he says regarding it not being outerversal. Please do not send any form of hate towards Key or his channel or any of his followers in the comment section or even on his YouTube channel itself. This is just to address some of the claims he makes about the Dragon Ball afterlife. As always, we're going for 10,000 subs, so we're aiming to beat the old channel. So if you haven't already subscribed, please do subscribe. And if you are one of my subscribers who's watching this new channel and you're like, hey, does Drip have two channels? Yes, I do. Subscribe to this one because this is the one I'm going to be posting on henceforth. I might still use the old channel for streaming, but I'm not going to be posting any actual videos.
Snake, King Kai's planet and Heaven all have set length, width and diameter, which means that they have physical measurements which require space. Heaven is explicitly compared to a physical structure in size, and King Kai's planet is implied to be smaller than the Earth, and to have less energy than it.
Key. If we're using the source material, let's use it all the way. It's explicitly stated multiple times in the source material that the afterlife itself is not a physical place, hence it cannot have any spatial temporal value. If something lacks physicality, then it inherently lacks spatial temporal axes. And since the claim is made in the source material that the afterlife lacks physicality and therefore lacks spatial temporal axes, it would just be the case that within the confines of Dragon Ball, these things do not actually pertain to spatial temporality existing in the afterlife, but are actually subjective notions that are imputed to simplify things and make it more entertaining for the readers. Keep in mind that you cannot physically illustrate something that is conceptual or non-physical in fiction. Even if you leave it as a blank white void, right? That still implies spatial temporality to some extent, because the color white needs photons to exist, and photons require space to exist. This is why within the confines of power scaling, we have to ignore certain things for the sake of quantification. Otherwise, nobody in fiction would be able to be outerversal because you can't properly illustrate how outerversal would look or appear within fiction. So when making the manga, Toriyama uses things that look physical, and then he makes them use physical terminologies to describe these things, because that is what the readers are capable of wrapping their minds around. It doesn't mean that these things are necessarily physical, especially when the contrary is directly stated.
Goku and Vegeta also explicitly mention that there is space between them. Janemba warps space to create holes in the fabric of the afterlife. In Dragon Ball Heroes, the characters note that there is space-time in the afterlife, and that they make holes in it to make rifts.
It could just be the case that within those instances, there was no other way to describe it for the reader. Key. Just because something is called a space doesn't necessarily make it a space, right? Using this argument would just be a nominal fallacy or a name fallacy. Would you have preferred Goku to say, hey Vegeta, there's reality between us, there's realm between us? Even using that would still imply space to some extent. Reality, dimension, space, room, place, all of that implies spatial temporality to some extent. Your argument would also just be a lot less parsimonious, since it doesn't make any sense narratively speaking, as the afterlife is a non-physical place that is designed for non-physical entities or souls to exist when they die, right? So it is a non-physical place which doesn't have any spatial temporal axes, as I explained earlier. My proposition would just be more parsimonious because it alleviates the argument from having more contradictory entities. To put it simply, my argument allows for the existence of implications of no spatial temporality and the existence of descriptions of spatial temporality to exist without contradicting each other, because the descriptions of spatial temporality are purely for namesake only and do not reflect the actual components of the cosmological structure.
The afterlife is noted to have space like that of the living universe, and that it has a circumference, a physical measurement.
As I said before, the word space does not necessarily imply spatial temporality, and these statements are simply to describe the diagram and not the actual structure, as it's quite literally stated by Toriyama that the diagrams are for simplification purposes only for the reader to wrap their minds around. So it's describing the diagram when it says it's 1/10 of the space of the afterlife, and not the actual structure, because obviously the afterlife is infinite, the universe is infinite, stated in the same Daizenshu which you are using to validate your arguments, so you can't argue against this. Obviously, they cannot draw or illustrate an infinite structure, so to just describe them as bubbles and one being bigger than the other by 10 times doesn't necessarily mean that any of them have space or size or measurement. It's all just for simplification purposes. Also, I'm not entirely sure you actually read the Daizenshu, because if you did, you would see the part where it's explicitly stated that the Kaioshin realm is completely separate from the macrocosm, aka the afterlife. They are not the same thing whatsoever. So even if we say the Kaioshin realm somehow has space, it doesn't concern the afterlife in any way whatsoever and doesn't affect its structure.
Goku moves in the afterlife, which requires space, since moving is the act of changing your position from one point of space to another.
My brother Key, of course the definition says that movement is the act of changing position from one point of space to another, because that definition is for our world, our real life world, where all forms of movement are done within space. In this case, we are talking about fiction where things like infinite and immeasurable speed exist. A measurable speed or irrelevant speed, which literally allows you to move outside the concept of space itself. So no, movement does not require space within fiction, which is why things like irrelevant speed can exist. If you want to learn more about it, just go ask my buddy Focus. I could argue that movement is not simply the change of position within space, but actually movement can also be defined as the alteration of coordinates. And coordinates themselves are non-physical and non-dimensional. They simply annotate or describe points in space, but they are not the point in space themselves. This implies that abiding by a rule or a law that implies zero-dimensionality or that is zero-dimensional in a place that is described as non-dimensional in the afterlife does not create any contradictions whatsoever.
The Daizenshu mentions extra-dimensional space in the afterlife.
The term extra-dimensional is simply used to describe or define something that is outside the Einsteinian space-time manifold, aka our universe or our dimension. It does not mean higher dimensional, and it does not necessarily mean something that is spatial. And if you listen to everything I said prior about the word space not necessarily having to mean that something is spatial temporal, then you can understand pretty easily why this does not in any way refer to that thing being spatial or temporal.
King Kai's planet has gravity, which requires space and time.
Key, please, let's not be dishonest, okay? Say the full thing. King Kai's planet doesn't just have gravity, but it has gravity 10 times that of Earth. But it's also a planet that's way smaller than Earth. In fact, it's just the size of a football field. That is completely impossible with how conventional gravity works, because you can't have a planet that's the size of a football field having 10 times more gravity than a planet the size of Earth. So it's obvious that this is not in reference to actual gravity, right? And this is more parsimonious with the fact that King Kai's planet exists in Otherworld, which is non-physical, which by extension would make King Kai's planet non-physical, right? So if it's non-physical, it means it has no mass. If it has no mass, it means there is no curvature of space-time, because the effect of gravity requires mass to curve space-time in order to create that attraction effect. So if there is no physicality, it means there is no mass in order to bend space-time. But that also means that there is no evidence of space-time to begin with, which is more consistent with the statements of the afterlife having no time, no concept of time, being non-physical, etc. So your argument really doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It makes more sense to say that it's a non-physical type of gravity that King Kai's planet has, rather than saying that it pertains to actual gravity, when that clearly cannot be the case, since if it did have actual gravity, King Kai's planet would be the size of planet Vegeta, but it's not.
Now let's move on to some of the main references of time in the afterlife. Goku needs time to cross Snake Way. Goku also goes to train with King Kai for 5 months.
Key, I don't know if you're aware of this, but the measurement of time is not a unified thing in Dragon Ball. As a matter of fact, it's not a unified thing in our world. The measurement of time is determined by the axis of a planet around its star, right? So that's why Earth's time has a different measurement from Jupiter's time, right? We have a different length for our years. This is why the Grand Priest measures time in tacks for the tournament of power, with that being having to be converted into Earth time for Goku and the gang to understand. Just because you step outside of a plane of existence that has time into a plane of existence that doesn't have time does not mean that the plane of existence that has time would freeze from your perspective. There is literally no argument for that. So despite Goku being in the afterlife, which has no time, time in the living world and progression continues to flow. So, what Goku and Kinkai have is a subjective notion or mental ideation of earthly time measurement that they use to simplify things for the reader to understand how much time is passing on Earth, or how much time would have passed if you converted it to earthly time, right? Just because I go into a plane of existence that doesn't have time and count from 1 to 10 doesn't actually mean that 10 seconds actually passed in the plane of existence that doesn't have time, because that is simply a subjective notion, a personal mental ideation of time that I'm using to simplify my actions. If you want, you can DM me on Discord and I can teach you about atemporal causality.
Gregory moves at supersonic speeds, which requires time, and we also see Kinkai measure their speed using a watch. Fusion time quite literally runs out multiple times in the afterlife, which requires time to pass, since fusion lasts 30 minutes. There is linear progression in the afterlife, and in a world with no time, everything will be at once and there won't be any change or linear progression. Let's note that earlier space-time exists in the afterlife.
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure everything I said prior is already sufficient to debunk everything you said here, so I'm just gonna move on to the next point.
Kinkai also directly states that time never runs out in the afterlife, which confirms that time does exist. It also has gravity, which requires time. Examples of the afterlife having a set physical location. It is stated that the afterlife is located millions of light years away from Earth.
Why are we using scans from Boo's Fury when Boo's Fury has never been stated to be canon by any official source? Like, bro, it's not canon. It's never stated that we can use it for any sort of information or anything. The only reason why we use the RPG is because it's literally licensed and it's a guidebook, right? Boo's Fury is just a random game. Like, nobody uses Boo's Fury as any authentic source for information on Dragon Ball.
Stated to be physically located above the mortal universe.
Yeah, like I said before, that part specifically is in reference to the diagram, which, as I said before, again, Toriyama says is simply for simplification purposes, right? We obviously know that in context to spatial axioms, there is no objective axiom of up, down, left, or right? Directions are completely subjective and do not exist objectively, which is why if both of us are standing on one side of the planet and then I go to the other side of the planet and point downwards, that would be your upwards. But if you pointed downwards, that would be my upwards, right? But if we exchange, then the directions change again. So there is no objective notion of up or down. They're entirely subjective. And the fact is that in Asian mythology and things surrounding that, when a realm is stated to be beneath another, right, it's more likely that they're referring to that realm that is above the other being a higher plane of existence, and them just trying to simplify it for the human mind to be able to wrap their minds around it. Like, think about it. You use the Daizenshuu to validate your arguments, which the Daizenshuu states that the mortal universe is infinite in size, right? So how can the afterlife be on top of infinity? Like, how do you imagine that?
It's stated that Whis needs 3 minutes to travel between Earth and Kinkai's planet, while he needs over 2 hours to travel between a planet right outside of Universe 7, and over 30 minutes to travel between 2 planets in the same universe.
I believe I have already addressed this.
Goku uses instant transmission to travel to the afterlife, despite it working by traveling through space. This
Instant transmission does not work by traveling through space. It's actually the exact opposite, and I'm gonna explain why. When Supreme Kai is teleporting with Goku, they get hit by Baby's attack mid-instant transmission, and it warps Goku into a different dimension of space as he falls. We then learn that Goku fell into the Sugoroku space, which is an area between dimensions or an area between time and space. So the realm of instant transmission and the Sugoroku space are two completely different things, because Goku falls from instant transmission into the Sugoroku space, but it's obvious that they are connected and accessible from each other. It's actually stated within the Chozenshu that there is a subspace that contains both the hyperbolic time chamber and the Sugoroku space, so they are contained within this realm. Interestingly, it's also stated that this subspace has no concept of time or space. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that you have 2 cups on a table, right? The space between those cups is, well, obviously between them. So in this case, the hyperbolic time chamber and the Sugoroku space are those cups, and the instant transmission realm, or the subspace, is the space between those cups, right? And it stated that it lacks the concept of space and time. This makes sense, as whenever Goku uses instant transmission, his movements appear to be instantaneous. This also makes sense with the fact that the Sugoroku space is stated to be located in an area between dimensions, as the instant transmission realm is quite literally between the Sugoroku space and the hyperbolic time chamber, as it encompasses them. This is why the instant transmission realm has a consistent design, and is also stated to be a realm that transcends space and time.
why it didn't work inside a black hole, and why it can be used to teleport inside completely separate dimensions.
Key, these arguments are terrible. None of this logically follows. Firstly, we know that's not an actual black hole, it's a technique shaped like a heart, so I don't know why you brought this up. And secondly, Goku can teleport to places if he can send someone's energy there. But that girl in the tournament of power created a separate dimension, making them unable to sense their energy and unable to teleport inside it. And none of these premises require instant transmission to be tied to space in order to work.
The afterlife falls inside spacetime given the fact that it exists within parallel quests, which are stated to exist within spacetime.
With all the evidence for the things in Dragon Ball cosmology having both spatial and aspatial entities, it's obvious that it's not going to function exactly the way as a regular timeline, as there's literally conceptual realms, non-physical realms, and etc. Also, I watched your attempt at then is the transmission realm debunk, and everything you did was just appeal to names, bro. Like, you just kept saying, oh, because it's called a space, because it's called a dimension, then it is a dimension, and bro, it was just plagued with name fallacies. Like, it's just so easy to refute, bro. Like, you can't be using just because something is called something means it is that thing, bro. You can't be using that when obviously there's contrary evidence to that, and it's more logical to say that these terms are just being used to simplify things, as there is no human terminology that can be used to perfectly describe something that is aspatial or non-physical, specifically in terms of its scope or components, without implying spatial temporality in one way or the other linguistically.
The afterlife is also created by time fragments since it exists within parallel quests, which are created by time fragments.
Like I said before, this is just another name fallacy, okay? Just because it's called a time fragment does not necessarily mean that it has to pertain to space-time only, because as I said, it contains things that are aspatial, conceptual, atemporal, etc. Let's say for the sake of the argument that we've concluded that the afterlife is outerversal and exists within the timeline, right? So in Trunks' timeline, Goku dies of a heart virus and goes to the afterlife, which is outerversal. Trunks then goes back in time to save Goku, resulting in Goku being alive. But if Goku is alive, then Goku never went to the afterlife. And if Goku never died, then Trunks never had a reason to go back in time to save Goku. And if Trunks never had a reason to go back in time to save Goku, then Goku dies. But if Goku dies, Trunks has a reason to go back in time to save Goku. And if Trunks has a reason to go back to time to save Goku, Goku never died. And if Goku never died, then Trunks never had a reason to go back in time to save Goku. And if Trunks never had a reason to go back in time to save Goku, Goku dies, and etc., etc., etc. It forms an infinite loop. So Toriyama adopted a parallel world system where the timeline splits in two, which also affects the atemporal realms and the conceptual realms as well, because they are affected by the logical decisions made. Simply put, the existence of the afterlives in different timelines is not as a result of space-time, but as a result of the fact that logically, an afterlife has to exist that Goku is not in, and another afterlife has to exist that Goku is in, because in one timeline Goku is alive, and in the other timeline Goku is dead.
An example of the afterlife having a set size is that the Kaioshin realm is noted to be 10% of the combined size of the afterlife and the mortal universe's space.
Like I said, that's for the diagram and not the actual thing key.
Examples of physical matter existing in the afterlife include Goku and others being able to enter it with their physical bodies and clothing.
Key, you forgot to include the fact that Goku was given a special body by the gods, which allowed him to do so for the sake of the plot. And also, Goku bringing Cell into the afterlife is just an example of plot-induced stupidity. And there is no others in this scenario, like it's just Goku and Cell, which as I said is plot-induced stupidity. Because Cell was not given any special body or special permission to exist in the afterlife with his physical body by any of the gods. So Goku bringing him there was obviously not planned and not fully thought out, and is an obvious example of plot-induced stupidity where the authors don't think of absolutely everything.
There is food and water in the afterlife, both being physical things.
Or it's just a non-physical variant of food and water that Goku is able to consume with his special body that allows him to exist in a non-physical place that is granted to him by the gods. Yes, I know it sounds goofy, but you really can't debunk it or refute it. It's a genuine logical explanation. Like, you can't expect authors to be able to completely and perfectly represent outerversal things within fiction without making the story completely boring.
Janemba is noted to have a physical body. Examples of the afterlife being bound by dimensions.
We know that Janemba is in fact not physical because he's literally made from a soul that absorbed all the evil and became a demon. Let's remember that you can't draw something that's non-physical, right? So everything in the afterlife and every outerversal realm in fiction ever will always be drawn in a way that implies physicality. So when they are describing Janemba, they're obviously going to use terms like, oh, his physical form or his physical shape or whatever to simplify things for the reader to understand his technique, which allows him to split his body, right? It doesn't mean that he is in fact physical. Like I said, he's literally a soul that absorbed evil. Both of those things are not physical whatsoever.
Afterlife exists inside the macrocosm, which exists inside the neutral space, both being physical spaces.
You did not present any evidence for it being physical space whatsoever. I'm pretty sure you're just arguing it off of the name as usual.
Time travel affects the afterlife and creates new afterlives when the timeline splits.
I already refuted this when I talked about Trunks and the parallel quest, so just go back in the video.
It is directly stated to be bound by dimensions by Coyama if you believe that he is reliable.
If Coyama says something that contradicts the source material, then I obviously am not going to take that as valid. Yes, Coyama has said things that are correct, like the afterlife transcending dimensions, which is supported by the Daizenshu and the Chozenshu, right? But Coyama can also say things that are incorrect, like the afterlife being completely bound by dimensions, which is false. And sometimes Coyama even talks about the real world, so it's kind of ambiguous whether or not he's talking about the afterlife in Dragon Ball or the afterlife in the real world, so we can't use these statements to debunk anything. In fact, I think it makes more sense for Coyama to be referring to the real world because he believes that in the real world it goes up to the 7th dimension, right? But he specifically states multiple times that the afterlife goes beyond dimensions and space. He also agrees with scans that verbatim state that the afterlife has no concept of time in Dragon Ball, etc. So it's obvious that Coyama knows that the afterlife in Dragon Ball has no concept of time, no dimensions, etc. And when he talks about dimensions, he's talking about what he believes the afterlife to be in the real world. Just go look at all the old Koyama statements if you want to understand.
The afterlife exists within parallel quests, which are timelines created by time fragments. This quite literally means that the afterlife is not only physically contained within spatial-temporal dimensions, but also that time can literally create an entire afterlife, which the fanboys want us to believe is a metaphysical structure that contains no time and scales beyond it. So let's get over all the scans that people use to claim that the afterlife has no space or time. Number 1, Goku says that you don't have time in the afterlife, hence Super Saiyan 3 is easier to use there. Number 2, the CG talks about the same thing, mentioning that in the afterlife there isn't a concept of time, hence you can use Super Saiyan 3 better there. Therefore, the Platonic concept of time does not exist in the afterlife. Number 3, the afterlife is spiritual and thus it should not be bound by the space and time of the living world. Number 4, Coyama said it, which he didn't. Number 1 and 2, Goku is talking about lifespans and the time he had left on Earth, not that the afterlife has no time. Super Saiyan 3 uses too much energy and thus it shortens his lifespan, thus it's easier to use it in the afterlife where he is immortal. Since the databook is talking about the same thing and is specifically referring to this very statement, this means that the context is the same.
So I'm gonna need y'all to forgive my brother Ki because he doesn't understand how Japanese works. So I'm gonna just help him out with this one, okay? So the scan says, Jikan te mono ga aru kono yo. Jikan means time, right? And the phrase te mono ga aru is a colloquial way to express the form that there is such a thing or such a thing exists. So simply put, Jikan te mono ga aru kono yo means in this world, time exists. Now, if Goku is talking in contrast to Otherworld, then it's directly implying that in Otherworld, time does not exist. And this is not talking about the flow of time or whatever, but the existence of time. That is what the kanji represents. It is talking about the existence of time itself and not the flow. It says nothing about the flow. So, Ki, you are unfortunately just horribly wrong about this scam because Goku directly talks about the existence of time in the living world being a limitation for Super Saiyan 3 and citing the afterlife as something that you should use Super Saiyan 3 in because it has no time. Because there's literally no time for the form to run out in the afterlife. If Super Saiyan 3 consumes 10 units of energy or life force in the living world and only consumes 1 unit of energy or life force in the afterlife, that still doesn't alleviate the problem of consumption of energy, which Goku implies is completely alleviated when he's in the afterlife afterlife using Super Saiyan 3. So your interpretation is completely wrong based on the kanji and the context of the situation as well. Your interpretation is also far less parsimonious because, as I said, afterlife is a non-physical place, which makes it consistent with having no space or time, as space or time are intertwined and linked together and cannot exist without another. And this also backs up the guidebook that states that Otherworld has no concept of space and time. It also backs up everything about the afterlife being dimensionless and etc.
Something being spiritual does not mean that it's not subject to space or time. Not all spiritual models are the same, and to assume that Dragon Ball follows a spiritual model where the spiritual is not bound by space or time is a baseless assumption.
So this is an obvious straw man of the initial position. The argument isn't that being non-physical makes you unbound by the concepts of space and time or whatnot. Like I pointed out earlier in the video, it's directly stated in the guide that souls are non-physical in Dragon Ball, and if they are non-physical, it means they lack any sort of spatial temporal axes, and if they lack spatial temporal axes, it means they will be non-dimensional. The argument is that something that is non-dimensional existing in a realm that's stated to have no concept of time or space causes no contradictions. So nobody is arguing that being a ghost automatically makes you outerversal, so you're obviously strawmanning Key.
Dragon Ball Super Trunks doesn't believe in traditional ghosts despite having died and having been to King Koyama's place, and he claims those are not the same things, so this implies the spiritual in Dragon Ball is actually vastly different from the spiritual in tradition.
Trunks making the claim that they're not the same thing does not mean that it's true that they're not the same thing. What's gonna be the external justification for that claim rather than it just being stated? Why can't we take Goten's statement as valid, as Goten quite literally implies that Goku and Vegeta coming back as souls is equal to them being ghosts, and we know souls in Dragon Ball are stated to be non-physical, therefore being non-dimensional and etc. So I feel like that's more consistent with the source material rather than Trunks' statement.
This is seen in multiple instances, such as ghosts having late in Dragon Ball, ghosts being able to fall on the ground and take damage from it.
I honestly cannot take you seriously if you're gonna try and use a gag manga to debunk something in Dragon Ball. Like, bro, what? I know it's canon to Dragon Ball. Like, those are gags, bro.
We also see that ghosts in Dragon Ball don't drift off in space when they're on Earth despite them being stationary, which requires gravity to affect them and to keep them locked to the planet. The fact that they can be seen also requires photons to interact with them and bounce off them, further showing that the spiritual in Dragon Ball is subject to the physical even if not on the same level as humans.
Key, these arguments are genuine buns, bro. Like genuine cancer. Why does the fact that the ghost can stay stationary necessarily mean that it has to be affected by gravity? Like, if it really was affected by gravity, then why isn't it all the way on the ground? Why is it floating? Key, this is a whole bunch of dishonest reaching. Like, if you need amps on Dragon Ball, just DM me, bro. Like, I'll amp you for free. Like, I can definitely amp you on Dragon Ball. Like, you need a lot of amps because this is just disappointing, bro. The rest of the video is just him recycling points that I've already debunked, or him just making arguments that I never made, so I really don't care about that. And if you're wondering why I'm not just debating Key on it, well, me and Key already discussed this, and I already explained to him that for several months now, if you noticed, I haven't posted any debates whatsoever. It's because I quit debating in general. Debating has become way too toxic, and I'm not willing to put up with that anymore unless someone's paying me to debate. So if you do want me to debate Key, then just DM me on Discord with your money. I also explained to Key that Exility still debates, and he's actually the one who invented the whole outerversal Goku meta and just taught it to me, and then I popularized it. So yes, Exility is the real GOAT. I've been saying this for years. Y'all should not sleep on Exility. He taught me everything I know about outerversal Goku and debating and whatever. So Key actually agreed to discuss or debate with Exility whenever he had the chance. So we're going to have Key versus Exility eventually. And if you pay, you can have Key versus me. And no, I'm not quitting power scaling. I'm just not debating unless I'm being paid to put up with all the toxicity. And also, yeah, as you can see, me and Key are not enemies. We've spoken multiple times in the past. We've talked about life and other things that are besides power scaling. So, yeah, you don't have to be enemies with him just because you disagree with his takes. Besides his power scaling takes, he's actually a pretty chill and reasonable person. And I have a lot of friends that I disagree with their power scaling takes, but I still keep them around. For example, Clorox, Steezy. Clorox has Bleach at freaking outerversal. I have Bleach at planet level. Clorox thinks Dragon Ball Super is canon to Dragon Ball GT, and GT is stronger. Same with Steezy, but both of them are still my friends. So, yeah. we're not having enemies. If you want me to debunk, rebunk, or scale any verse, I'll put the link to my server in the comment section below and pin it, so just DM me on Discord and we can talk business. If you haven't already subscribed to this channel, please subscribe so we can surpass the old channel. Let's get to 10,000 subs on this channel, guys. Please subscribe. Please do it now. I see you. You're not doing it. Do it right now. And also, don't forget to drop a like on the video. You might think that's not important, but it's very, very important as it helps push the video out on the YouTube algorithm. So please do drop a like. For those of y'all who watched to the end, I'm currently working on a video that's explaining everything about Dragon Ball canonicity, from GT to Super to Heroes to the movies and everything, and how they all connect to the Dragon Ball world. So keep an eye out for that. I'm currently scripting the video, so make sure you subscribe if you want to see it. And I'm also working on some other videos like Marvel versus DC, comp Dragon Ball scaling, and some other verses as well. So if you want to see all that content in the next coming months, do subscribe.